Hello one and all, this will be another video about military history. As you can see, the title is Why Japan Could Not Win World War II. I know I used a rather blunt title, but I mean no victory is inevitable, but I don't see how Japan could have won World War II anyway. If you think there's a way they could have won, leave a comment. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay. First off, Japan was already committed in China when they launched the Pearl Harbor attack. They had millions, they had well over 1 million troops in China. About 1.5 million, I think. So that's a huge, massive manpower commitment. It is huge. It ties down a lot of resources that could be used to do other things, obviously. Second off, when they attacked Pearl Harbor, they didn't really do any damage that would be meaningful on a strategic level. As I said in my video regarding Pearl Harbor, it didn't do anything but piss America off. I mean, there were so many juicy targets there, starting with obviously the oil wells. I mean, forget the carriers. They're useless if they can't go anywhere. And certainly their carriers were not in Pearl Harbor, so they couldn't get the shit bombed out of them. Three, they missed the submarine pins, and we'll get into why that was such a problem later on. And four, they missed the shipyards. Without those shipyards, the damaged ships in the Pacific Fleet would have to go all the way back to the mainland, which is a long road to haul. And so, yeah, they really missed a golden opportunity at Pearl Harbor, especially with those oil wells. If those oil wells had been taken out, they could have prolonged the war by about 10 months, according to Admiral Nimitz. And anyway, when they opened up that two-front war, they started by hitting the British in Malaysia, and the U.S. and the Philippines. They went to war with two nations that had way more industrial power than them, and this is probably the second and biggest reason: industrial power. Both the U.S. and Britain. Britain had about 10% of the world's industry. The U.S. had 41% of the world's industry. Japan had only about 3.5% of the world's industry. So as we can see, that doesn't really slide well, because that's, between them, even the U.S. alone, that's over 10 times the amount of industry, and Britain, not counting the USA, that's almost over 3 times the amount of industry. And the Japanese did not have the manpower or anything, real manpower or resources to compete with the U.S. in total industrialized warfare. The third reason was the code was broken by U.S. code. Their naval codes were compromised by U.S. code breakers. That led to the disaster at Midway and a few other really terrible events for them. And back to what I was saying about Midway, a lot of people say that is the decisive battle, and yeah, it probably shortened the war out by a year. But the reality is that even if the U.S. had lost catastrophically at Midway, which was not likely because the U.S. had the code, had the huge amounts of intelligence, like all the U.S. carriers sunk, no Japanese carriers sunk. The U.S. would have just started cranking out more aircraft carriers much faster and more warplanes, more aircraft. And even if they had, the U.S. Navy would have eventually outnumbered the Japanese almost 2 to 1. After about 2 years. And another thing is that their supply lines were stretched and exposed. The Pacific Ocean is a huge place. Remember those submarine pens at Pearl Harbor? They sent out their subs, and these subs started sinking merchant ship after merchant ship after merchant ship. And they also took out a few Japanese aircraft carriers too. The Shinyo, however you pronounce that ship, that name, it's a Japanese province. It was, anyway, the Tahoe was also sunk, so was the Shikaku. And, but the real damage was the merchant ships. They couldn't supply keep the army, Imperial Japanese Army supplied in the Pacific. And because of that, they ran out of ammunition, they ran out of food, they ran out of fresh water, they ran out of medical supplies, they ran out of adequate clothing, they ran out of tools, they ran out of pretty much everything. And another reason is Japan had faulty doctrine. See, at Tsushima, in the Russo-Japanese War, the Imperial Japanese Navy destroyed the Russian Navy in a single battle, just cracked its back. And they adopted that doctrine, that they kept that line of thinking for the next 40 years, that one battle in the Pacific would decide it all. However, and that led to a number of mistakes, such as not preparing for a long war. And they also did not deploy their submarines adequately. They deployed them against warships. And they had some pretty badass submarines, believe it or not, but they just didn't really know how to use them. They did not sink very much tonnage, at least not compared to the Germans or the Americans. But anyway, the idea that it was just like a one-trick pony, basically. And I'm pretty sure you already know this right about now, but the Japanese were lagging in a lot of aspects in warfare, in at least land warfare, because they didn't put much emphasis on semi-automatic rifles, nor did they, and they put very little emphasis on submachine guns. The Japanese submachine gun, I think it was called anyway, the Japanese produced about 10,000 submachine guns, and they looked a lot like the Sten gun, but anyway, the U.S. was just cranked around about 1 million Thompsons and hundreds of thousands of M3 grease guns. And that was a big disadvantage, not to mention the fact that Japanese tanks sucked. A big floppy donkey dick, okay? They just did. And that was due primarily to their experiences in China, because you don't really need really big, heavy tanks like the Tiger or Panther or T-34 or IS-2 in a place like China, because there's not very much chance that you'll be involved in tank warfare. They're mostly going to be used for infantry support. But anyway, it was just the Japanese. Also, another reason is their extreme overconfidence. They had this belief that they were not the descendants of gods, and that's only the beginning. The emperor was divine and infallible and all that crap. And they also had victory disease. Remember, you learn more from victories than you do. You learn more from defeats than you do from victories. And as Yoda said in the new Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi, the greatest teacher, failure is. But anyway, this is combined with the fact that, the U.S., the U.S. was just constantly advancing, trying to get new stuff in. I mean, that was the reason why they started to get the kamikazes into it, because the anti-aircraft outfitting of the U.S. fleet was just going up and up and up and up and up by the year, or sometimes less than that. It just got insane, the amount of lead we could, our soldiers, sailors, and Marines could just put into the air. It was just amazing. And the U.S. fleet probably had the most sophisticated anti-aircraft system in the whole world at that time. And it was just a nightmare. That's why the Japanese started doing the kamikaze. They realized that, it was just suicide going, trying to dive bomb or torpedo bomb these ships. So they just said, oh well, fuck it. And they started these ramming attacks. And, anyway, Japan paid a grim price for it. Its military was complete. Both the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Imperial Japanese Army were both completely annihilated. I mean, there were about 1.8 million casualties, military casualties, and about 500,000 civilian deaths, destruction of every major area urbanized area in Japan, not to mention the loss of Japan's colonial empire. That pretty much gives a pretty strong testimony to just how fucking stupid their militarist leaders were. I mean, they were just dumb. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and if you can, leave a donation. It's for a good cause. See ya.